the building. It's been a minute, tell me how you're healing. Cause I'm about to get into my feelings. How you feeling? How you feel right now? Oh, I've been so down and under pressure. I'm way too fine to be distressed, yeah. Oh, I'm not the girl I was or used to be. But I might be better. Turn up the music, turn down the lights. I got a feeling I'm gonna be alright, okay, alright. It's about damn time. Turn up the music, let's celebrate. I got a feeling.
Hey y'all, welcome. Introduce yourself in the chat. Hello, who are you? Where are you calling in from?
I'ma need a sentimental man or woman to pump me up.
Hello.
Walking in my Balenciennes trying to bring out the fabulous. Cause I give a way too much. I'ma need like 2 shots.
Hi y'all. Hey Vicky, Bonita, Funky. I think I'm saying that correctly. Hello, Chris, Doug. Hey Doug, good to see you. Our Riverway friend. Yes, hello Megan, Rachel, Sarah. Hey y'all. Hey, my team members. Hello. Pam, good to see you, Dr. Pam, Jenna, Jeannie, hello, Sophia, Natasha from Portland, Oregon, Brady, hey Brooke, good to see you, hi Barb from Jackson, Casa, Kansas City, Jessica, hey Sparko, and Aaron, and Christine, and Christina, Kelly, and Ryan, hello Jamie, Isaiah. Woo, we got some friends with us today. Hey y'all. All right. All right. Wow, that wasn't such a gracious cutting off of the music, but I think we are ready to get started. All right. Hello, everybody. Hello. We are so happy that you're here. We're going to lean into this conversation. Welcome to this webinar, Redefining White Allyship, White People in the Fight Against Racism. Now, for those of you who might be new to us, I want to just take just a quick second to introduce Embracing Equity. Embracing Equity really exists to develop mindsets and practices that ensure an inclusive and equitable community. We help build stronger, more inclusive teams. We offer tailored solutions for the education sector and beyond, for Montessori, for organizations, and even funders, driving towards a world where every person can thrive. So, if you want to learn a little bit more or see how we can connect with you, use the link in the chat if you want to submit an inquiry form or schedule a free 30-minute inquiry call to see how we may support you in your equity journey. So it is my honor today to welcome you to this Real Talk, Real Action webinar series that is a part of really our ongoing work. And our goal, I guess is best said, to freely share resources, knowledge, research, and collective learning together. At the end of today's episode, we're going to offer some gifts from us to you. We'll share a sneak peek into the next 2 webinars and what the topic will be about. And we will have a Q&A so you can join in on this conversation. I'm really honored to introduce you to an esteemed panel who will be sharing nuggets of wisdom about how they deepened their journey to allyship. First, we have Nicolette Graff. Nicolette Graff earned her bachelor's degree in children's psychology and started her early childhood career as a toddler teacher. The biggest lesson she learned from the littlest of people is that equity starts at the beginning. Nicolette took her lessons from the classroom to the legislative stage as a care fellow in 2016, where she learned how to ensure practice, policies, and procedures, the P's, and equity always remained in the same sentence. She completed her master's in advocacy and political leadership from Metropolitan State University and received the Diversity and Equity Certificate from the University of Minnesota. Now, currently, as the Director of Equity and Inclusion at Child Care Aware of Minnesota, Nicolette works to interrupt oppressive systems that historically have not served young children and families, while supporting a growing a network of allies to carry out a mission of making early childhood rooted in equity and anti-racism. Glad you're here, Nikki. Next on our panel is Katie Kitchens. Katie Kitchens has spent the last decade and a half as a classroom teacher and instructional coach in public, independent, and nonprofit Montessori environments. Now, for the last 4 years, they have served as the English speaking elementary guide at Caris Children's Learning Center, an indigenous language revitalization school in Cochiti, New Mexico. Currently, Katie is in the finishing stages of their dissertation, which explores the ways in which families raise young white children are striving to cultivate anti racist familiar culture. So glad you're doing that work. I can't wait to read it. As Embracing Equity's lead program facilitator, they are grateful to work alongside all of you to radically imagine a more liberated future. Welcome, Katie, to the conversation. And finally, we have Carly Riley. Carly has served as a teacher, curriculum designer, and director of a nationally accredited teacher training program. Carly began her career in early childhood and special education as a public school teacher and holds a primary credential from the American Montessori Society, AMS, and a master's from the Harvard Graduate School of Education. As Senior Director of Learning at Embracing Equity, Carly works tirelessly alongside our robust community in reimagining organizations as welcoming, affirming, and culturally sustaining environments. Hey, y'all, welcome Carly to the conversation. So, as we begin to dive deep into this topic, as many of you know, or you might be learning for the first time today, Embracing Equity works with many organizations in centering anti racism and equity in their daily work. This work, however, is an ecosystem approach. That system includes individual work, interpersonal work, and institutional work. This ecosystem approach means that each piece is interconnected. We've learned some things along the way. And one of the things that we've learned is that you can't do one piece without the other. Today, we're going to delve into a specific piece of the individual work. And that specific piece today is white allyship. Often in doing this work, some, not all, but some white people come to us in two ways. One way is a way of hopelessness, a throwing up their hands, if you will, saying something like, I'm white. What can I do? Right? The other way, the way that we're talking about today, is a way of seeking how they can help. They actually ask the same question, but they ask it differently. They say, I'm white. What can I do to help? That's what we're going to talk about today. One of the most profound quotes that moves us and guides us is by Ijeoma Alo, who says, the beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself. And it's the only way forward. Now, I don't know about y'all, but when I first heard that, that was a mic drop for me. That was a mic drop. Like, ooh, okay, okay. I'm not just claiming something. I can do this. I can commit to doing this, and I can start with me. So let's do it, y'all. Let's have some real talk about this. Our three panelists are going to share their perspectives on how they did and are continuing to commit to allyship. So I'm going to start. I'd like to start with Nicolette. Nicolette actually wrote a blog entitled Coming Out as a Co-Conspirator. We will drop the link to that blog here. If you have not read it, please do. Great reading. But Nicolette, thank you for being here and writing a blog about your journey. You and I have had many conversations about the sometimes challenging work of being an ally as a white person in that identity, right? You talked about that a little bit in your blog. Can you speak to that here with us on this panel? Why is it so challenging?
Yeah, thank you for having me, everyone. I go by Nicolette or Nikki, so it'll be used interchangeably throughout the time we're together. But I hope I'm not alone in this thought. But I think the most challenging concept of this is thinking about DEI or anti-racism as a journey. And when I think about journeys, I think about journeys come with a map. They come with a GPS. They come with a checkpoint where you can say, am I going the right direction? They have people where you can say, like, can you just give me the directions of where I'm going? And there's this sense of, I'm going to be getting to the destination eventually. There's somewhere I'm going with this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I had to really shift that mindset of that I'm going to be the most perfect white person. I'm going to meet all the checkpoints. I'm going to go the direction I'm supposed to go. And I'm going to meet this destination of just being the best white person ever in this role. That's where I was going. I was in this journey mentality. But then Dr. Nicole encouraged me to just write about it, think about it. What does that mean? And I shifted my mindset to thinking more about my experience in this as being a part of a galaxy. And so galaxies have stars and moons and suns and planets, and they all have their own thing going on, but they're orbiting around each other, thinking about each other, trying not to run into each other, but they're still in the same system. And they got their own things going on, like stars are bursting into flames and planets have people on them doing wild things. And they're trying to figure out their own personal journey, but they're still a part of this system. And I had to self-identify as like a planet, that this is my own journey. I have to be in this orbit and work my way through this system. And when things like asteroids come, or in this case, racism, collectively, we have to figure out how to shift our planets and shift ourselves and still be a system. So I stopped thinking about it as a destination and how to be the perfect white person, and instead just be on my own planet and figure out my place within this orbit that I'm in.
Beautiful metaphor, and you painted such a beautiful picture. Thank you, Nicolette. I'm gonna. Any thoughts about that, Carly, Katie? Anything you want to add to that? Let's say it that way.
I think the thing that you made me think about, Nikki, is that, typically when you think about the journey, right, like there's a lot of help along the way. You have that perfect map, you know exactly where you're going with your GPS. But what I found to be part of this journey towards anti-racism as a white person is that there isn't a map. And actually, there's a bunch of different kinds of maps. There's many different roads to take, many different paths to get there. And so I have found myself at some points of the journey saying, okay, well, I'll wait for somebody to tell me the right way to go. What I realize now is actually it's my responsibility to figure out that way. Of course, with good information, leaning on the people that are in my community, really being a listener and a learner, but also taking that responsibility to figure out the journey on my own, to map it out, to get there, to put the gas in my own car, and to put a stake in the ground when it comes to my own philosophy related to anti-racism work and how I want to be working within a collective.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. All right. I want to bring our other panelists into this discussion even more. Katie, What has been important to you as you think about living as an anti-racist person in your identity as a white person, right? Is one part of your identity, right? Can you tell us what has been different, right? Because we're saying redefining allyship. What's been different in your journey to allyship?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in a place right now. I just had a baby with my partner, and they're 4 months old. So there's a lot of shifting and changing that's happening, moving from sort of, as I'm been doing this research for my dissertation, that it's become, more moved from theory to praxis. And so I think for me, it is this big question, sort of like what Carly was talking about, like how do we imagine new ways of being white that actively commit ourselves to race and racism, which hasn't happened collectively for white people, and we are still following a legacy of radical white ancestors who have done this alongside and in community with people of the global majority. Thank you, Lynn. And thanks, Anna. Thanks, y'all. So I think, that's a big part of the work for me has been to say, we don't have a roadmap, and we do sort of at least have these stories that have been intentionally obscured for us that we can look into. And then another piece has really been this sort of, again, along the lines of what Carly was saying with the responsibility taking, is figuring out how to cultivate emotional resilience and do some responsibility taking emotionally, and trying to be really honest with myself about, how am I, one of my common patterns that I've uncovered through this work is because of a people-pleasing tendency, right? I didn't want to be seen, sort of as Nikki was saying, like the opposite side of wanting to be seen as a good white person, whatever that means, is the fear of being seen as like a bad or racist or whatever person. And so when I would feel myself becoming overwhelmed by these feelings of shame and guilt, I would seek absolution from people of the global majority, right? And so how can I actually, the biggest game changer for me, and for me, the tool that I've used is self-compassion mainly, as a way of responsibility taking to take care of those own feelings. But it's deepened my relationships with people of the global majority, because now I'm not seeking anything in relationship. I don't it's this covert anti-racist way of going and saying, oh, how, pretending to be anti-racist, I should say. But now there can be authentic relationship where there's not that emotional demand or caretaking. It's also deepened my relationship with other anti-racist white people, because when you're trying to prove that you're the best, or you're at the very least not bad, then you're separating yourself from other white people and dehumanizing them, dehumanizing yourself in the process. And at the core of it, you're not doing what has to be collective work, which is reimagining an anti-racist white culture. So if I'm constantly pushing away, distancing myself from white people because I'm so ashamed of my own whiteness, I can't be working with them to say, how do we actually heal this together? And that has been especially true for people who are in the classroom. For me, people who are parents, having a child now, how do I not transfer that shame? And so that's been a big part that I've been thinking about a lot lately.
I appreciate you sharing that, because sometimes in my conversations with my, white colleagues and white friends, it is, I, as a person of the global majority, feel like sometimes this, somebody would say, this has happened or this happened. Was I racist? And I feel this huge weight to either absolve them, right, from this thing that may have happened, or to sort of take my ding, you're good, ding, you're good, like I'm crowning them, and that's hard. And so what I have found, like you said, in allyship, is really having that conversation. I've had that conversation lots of times, with folks saying, hey, here's what I'm grappling with, and here's what I'm coming to, and I just want you to listen, right? Sometimes it's just being a listening ear for somebody and just saying, and I know it's my work, and I'm going to work through it. And so I appreciate you saying you had to grapple with some things without putting that burden on people of the global majority. So thank you for talking us through that. What that makes me really lean into and think about, I'm going to turn to my partner in collaboration. We collaborate a lot. Carly, you and I work so closely together. And here's the thing, I get a front row seat. I get to see you doing this work on a personal and professional level. Can you share what drives you to do this work, both personally and professionally? What can you share with us about your journey to allyship?
Yeah, well, I think to answer that first question, what really drives me is a quote from Fannie Lou Hamer that is, "None of us are free until all of us are free." And so the work of racial and social justice isn't just to, everything's cool for the white folks, let's just bring people of color up to the same place and it'll work for them too. We are all suffering underneath systemic oppression wherever we are on the racial hierarchy. It's different, right? The different ways that we are suffering as a result of oppression, but it's not working for any of us. And so my motivation is to create a more liberatory, inclusive, affirming future for all of us, for everybody on the planet, not just for some, but for all, right?
Yeah.
And, I was thinking about this too, coming into this conversation. You asked a little bit about my journey. There's a lot of us white folks, myself definitely is an example of this, do a lot of intellectualizing. We get really stuck in our heads, and we try to think like, okay, what's the perfect way to be, a good white person? How do I make sure I don't harm anybody ever? How can I make sure that I'm staying in my lane and doing this work well with accountability? And sometimes we can get so far into our heads that we lose the plot a little bit. It makes me think about this one time in my capacity as senior director of learning at Embracing Equity. I was leading a project where everyone else on the working group were people of the global majority. And I got really in my head about what that meant for me as a white person to lead a team. And it was uncomfortable. So as a result of my discomfort, I started to sort of decenter myself from the leadership role, which in fact was not very helpful in this case. So later, when I was talking to one of our team members and an accountability buddy of mine, Rashi, who is a person of color, about my discomfort and my strategy to sort of shrink myself to make my role smaller in that space, she gave me a wake-up call by pointing out quite astutely that I was doing a couple of things. One, I was centering my own comfort by unilaterally making the decision to shrink my leadership role on that team. But also, too, that in doing so, I was engaging in paternalism by making that decision on my own, a decision I thought was a benefit to the group, but in fact made the project even more complicated because I was being in the way that I should. And so this is just a reminder that when we are talking about decentering whiteness, we're talking about decentering an ideology that centers whiteness as the best with the most value. It's not that white people always need to take a seat or decenter themselves as individuals right out of the room. And in moments where we as white folks are questioning our role or what our lane is, it can be an opportunity just to name that, to say, instead of making those decisions on our own unilaterally without any feedback from our community, to say, hey, I'm feeling some discomfort, and what can I reach out to my white accountability buddies to help me work through that, to face it head on, or also my accountability buddies that are people of the global majority too. It just is a reminder that community is so important, and it's so important to get out of our heads and to have these conversations in real time with the people that are invested in us and that we're invested in as well.
Lean into the discomfort. Yeah, that's hard. Yeah. Nikki?
Yeah, Carly, you're bringing up some thoughts for me that we've discussed many times, but just thinking about honoring the real mixed messages you receive as a white person in this role. It's show up and be powerful, but also step back and listen. You should be with people of the global majority, but not speak for them. You should like don't be silent, but don't say the wrong thing. It's a lot. It's confusing. But I think one thing, going back to the question you asked, Dr. Nicole, is what drives you to do the work personally, professionally, is this, we can think about it as permission, but it's more of an ask. And this permission from folks from the global majority saying, I need you. And Dr. Nicole said to me once, I need you to be my ally. I need you to be my co-conspirator. My family has asked me to step up for them. My colleagues of color have asked me to come to a meeting and support them. We have been asked multiple times to show up. We have the permission to do so. So despite I'm the only one in the room and I don't want to take the space, or I'm not quite sure this is going to come out right, I have permission to come in this space and attempt what I can. And I can come be messy, and I can come kind of play with what's going to happen. Sometimes I even practice announcing like, this is going to come out wrong. Please help me with this. Or, check me, please. I'm going to start this conversation this way, and then being open to getting that feedback back. I think that's the thing that really like grounds me, is like, I've been asked to do this. No one told me to, but I've been asked. And so that permission to come and lean in authentically and do it how I think I can do it, that's a driving force for me.
Nice. Anything you want to add, Katie? What drives you?
I mean, I think what drives me is a vision of a more liberated future. You know, like I always joke with Carly, like life's hard enough, you know, like even in an ideal, perfect world, people that we love are going to pass away. You know, our time here is fleeting, and we could all just like, I deeply, deeply believe in the potential for a future which is fully liberated for all people, and that we can do it. I have to believe that. And part of why I believe that is because I get to work with kids. And when you listen to children, they articulate already a liberated future. And so I think, you know, there sometimes it feels like when you maintain that like revolutionary optimism, sometimes it feels foolish or you know, naive. But I think it's essential, and it's such a deep responsibility that we hold. And it's so easy, especially as a white person who might be coming to this work for the first time as an adult, to feel so overwhelmed by the depth and weight, and like, oh, here's another way that racism manifests. Here's another way that racism manifests. Here's another one. Here's another one. That it can feel so overwhelming that we become pessimistic and say, well, that's just how it is. What a luxury to be able to just say, well, I guess that's just how it is. Right. And so, you know, that's my commitment with everyone, with everybody who's here, with everybody who's not here, with us on the call. I just think that it's our responsibility. We don't have another choice.
Oh, I love that. And I'm checking out. Don't forget, y'all, check out the chat. Jamie's, thank you, Olsen, for your comment about really defining anti-racism. Jamie dropped a resource. Natani dropped something. Laura said racism isn't a problem for BIPOC people to solve. It's a white problem. So we need to participate in the solution. Come on, y'all. Y'all, listen. Come on, join us. Drop those nuggets in the chat. I love that. Heather, revolutionary optimism. That's right. That's right. We heard that. We heard that here. Let's keep going. Let's keep the conversation going. You all are, you know, also making me think about sort of the nuances of this work, right? The wording that folks use. And so this question is for any or all of the panelists to answer. We talk very deeply and passionately about being anti-racist. And sometimes I hear folks just come say, anybody, right? I'm not racist. What do you see as the difference between being non-racist and anti-racist? First of all, is there a difference? Jump in there, y'all.
Well, I don't think there's such a thing as non-racist.
Mm.
Um,
Oh, say more, say more, say more.
just because it's not, it's racism is a moving force. So and I think this is oftentimes difficult for as white folks for us to grapple with too. Like, we also didn't choose to be born into a system of white supremacy, and we
Mhm.
were, and it was set up to benefit us. So that doesn't mean we have protection from everything bad that can happen. But what
Yeah.
it means is that we have easier access to things. We do have protection
Mm.
in various ways.
Mm.
And so I think it's, anti-racist to me, and some of the work that I've been doing, both like research wise and then working with anti-racist white people, one of the biggest things that has come up is the level of intentionality required to live in anti-racist ways, because we've been socialized our entire life. We've been receiving these messages implicitly about the superiority that we inherently have because of how we're born. That's the messaging that we're constantly receiving.
Yeah.
And so, and our ways of our ways of operating in the world. And
Mm.
so the level of intentionality that it requires to disrupt that's what anti-racism is to me. It's this constant. My advisor, Dr. Lilia Monso, says, every single moment is a moment of praxis. You don't have to have a whole plan. You don't have to get out and go and do a whole project. Of course, that's one form of it. But every single time I talk, every single time I relate with another human being, every single time
Mm.
I, think about what books I'm buying for my baby, or the way that we're talking to them, what food, like how we approach food and bodily autonomy with children, how we introduce different genders, what sort of music we're listening to. All of these different moments are moments where we can choose to think for a minute, like, am I upholding white supremacy culture, or am I attempting to disrupt it?
Oh, love that. Love that. Yeah.
I think when I'm thinking about not racist and anti-racist, not racist is so definitive. If you just put not in front of anything else, it ultimately means you're not going to do it at all. So I'm not going to kid birthday parties, which if you go to anti-racism, I'm going to go to birthday parties, but not ones that require piñatas or zoos or us going swimming. You still get the experience, you still get the richness, but this understanding that you're still participating. And I think that's the difference. Like, saying not is an absolute, that it's not a conversation I can have. It's not something I identify with. It's nothing I'm going to unpack and kind of work through. In anti-racism is just a different way of living, a freer way. That's a good way to describe it. But this like ability to be fluid and come to the space as yourself and figure out racism within your own body and the world of how you see it. And so when you say not racist, you're just cutting yourself off from so many beautiful opportunities. And when you're saying anti-racist, you're allowing yourself to see things you did not know existed and work through them and experience them and practice through them. And then that way, when things keep happening, you're able to show up and say, man, 5 years ago, I said I wasn't going to do this at all. But now I have new friends. I have new understanding. I get to experience cultures I didn't know existed. Like, the richness that comes from anti-racism is incredible. I wish we could change the word, maybe, so it would be so, like, to describe the beauty that's contained within inside of it. I think anti-racism can be a bit scary, and especially for white folks, like, how do I identify with that?
Yeah.
But if we could really encapsulate like how gorgeous and fruitful it is, like, you're missing a lot when you say I'm not racist.
Thank you. I love Yvette added over there. Non-racist seems like faith without action. Anti-racism feels like it demands action. Thank you for that, Jason. With every breath, love. Yes, love, 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 love. All right. What else? Carly, you want to add to that before we move on?
Sure. Yeah. I think what I'm hearing too, both from Nikki and from Katie, is this idea of culture making, right? So what we're trying to think of, what we do in our programming, what I think about as a white person, what I think about with Katie as we're designing content for people to go through our curriculum and cohorts, is what does it look like to create white culture that isn't rooted in supremacy? And so this idea of taking action, this idea of building a daily, in every moment choice to be against racism, to be working towards anti-racism, is culture making. And it's work that we need to do as white folks. Katie alluded to this earlier. Like, this is our job, and it hasn't happened yet. And so we as white people need to come together to see the humanity in one another, to reclaim our own humanity, and to build again, like I said, white culture that is not rooted in supremacy, but rather white culture that's rooted in anti-racism, that's rooted in this vision towards collective liberation.
Love that. Love that. Love that. We're going to open this conversation up to our folks in a minute, to the folks who have joined us. So be thinking about your questions that you want to ask of this esteemed panel, and you can drop it in the chat and we'll be throwing them out. But come on, everybody. Get your pencils, get your pen, if you're on your phone taking notes, that's all good. This is the moment, right? In addition to everything that you've heard so far, I'm going to ask each of the panelists, what advice would you give to other white folks who want to either begin their journey of being an ally or want to deepen their journey? What are some practical takeaways that they can start immediately following this webinar? And now let me add this. It's not only for white folks, it's for people of color too. Because sometimes, remember at the top I said, sometimes white folks come to us and say, I'm white, what can I do? So people of color, get your pen out too, get your paper out too, so that if someone comes and asks you, you can say, here's what I heard from some allies who are really in the work and doing the work, okay? So again, the questions are, what advice, panelists, would you give to other white folks who want to either begin their journey of being an ally or want to deepen their journey? What are some practical takeaways that they can start immediately following this webinar? All right, let's go.
Here, I'll jump in there first. I think the number one thing I think about that came to mind immediately as you asked that question, Dr. Evans, is find your people. Find people that you can have these conversations with, and particularly look for other white folks to be having these conversations with, right? We're building culture. We're coming together. We're doing this work as a collective. And my recommendation is to find that white accountability buddy that both brings a lot of joy into your relationship, but also a level of criticality and analysis. So find that other white person who's maybe been doing this work a little bit longer than you have, or has been engaged a little bit longer, that can hold you accountable, but in a way, we call it compassionate accountability, that can hold you accountable and also see your humanity, to be invested in you, to love you so much that they know that you can do better.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Carly.
Yeah, and I'll jump onto that too, since Carly is one of my dear accountability partners. But I want to invite everybody, if your phone's next to you, then take it out and open your calendar app. And I want you to create a recurring event or sometime around the middle of the day, maybe lunchtime, that just says, did you talk to another white person about race today? And I've had this maybe for like 3 or 4 years. And so right now it's like, yeah, I talked to the baby about race today. And maybe that's who I've talked to by that point. But what it does is offer me the opportunity to say, did I or didn't I? And then why? Were there situations where I could have, but I avoided it?
Ooh.
Do I still have an opportunity later today? That's why it's good to do it at the middle of the day so that we can still change it. But we know that it's so easy to fall back into whiteness. There's a statistic, I'm not sure how to cite it, but something around 75% of white people are not in relationship with people of the global majority.
Wow.
And that's intentional. That's intentional. That's by segregation, right? That's an intentional thing. And so we can't just wait to be around people of the global majority to have conversations around race and racism. Like Carly said, it's culture building. A big hurdle to overcome in our culture building is the fact that white people actively avoid engaging in conversations around race and racism.
Wow.
And if we
Wow.
can't make it comfortable and, like Nikki said, be messy about it, I don't know you don't have to pull out a PowerPoint. You don't have to make it a whole thing. You can even just say, that thing made me uncomfortable, or I'm reading this article, or I went to this webinar today, or whatever it is. So that's what can you do right in this specific moment?
Before we move on, I want to stop there. That's a staggering data point. 75% of white people do not have a single friend or somebody in their close circle who is a person of the global majority, right? So that hit me like a ton of bricks, right? I'm like, oh, wow. So I'm going to push here. Does that mean that you're saying, oh, let me go find me what it say? What does that mean, Katie?
Thanks, Dr. Evans. Yeah, and also just to say to uplift Candace too in the chat, what I don't mean is go seek out people of the global majority to have these conversations with either. I very specifically put, did you talk to another white person about racism?
Yes.
But no, it's not about having this, like, it's not another way of tokenizing people of the global majority. What it is when I think about that statistic, I think about how saturated then in whiteness is my worldview. The way that it blocks my ability to empathize and humanize people of the global majority. What does it mean about when I'm building policies or when I'm working with children, what viewpoints I'm coming from, which I'm reinforcing, which I'm reinscribing. And so it's not about, please don't try to, please don't go out and say, now I feel that as a call to awkwardly talk to a person of the global majority in the grocery store and try to be their friend. That's no. But what it is to reflect on, what does that mean? Why is it like that? And how is that impacting how I'm navigating the world, and then how I'm going to engage in anti-racism work?
Yeah, I hear very clearly you all saying, start here, start with, talking to other white folks. Let's start. Our dear friend Candace is here in this, and one of the quotes that she said, which is still resonating with me, is, do your work so that you don't become work for others. And that's what I hear collectively you all saying. But come on, Nikki, I want to hear from you too. What's your advice as well?
Yeah. I think that moving forward after this webinar, you should think about, if in 2050 the world was anti-racist, where would you as an individual be? And then you need to think about what you would need to do to be a functional part of that cultural shift. So you have 25 years, which is a long time to get on board and really massage this muscle and think about it. And what would you do or need to do that? And then if you have this question, that's a common one that keeps coming up of like, what do I need to do? Tell me what I need to do. I heard this really great practice of shifting that question to, what is prompting me to ask that question in the first place? How do I not know what to do in 2024? How do I stop myself based on my personal feelings or my uncomfortable level? So shift it back to not what do I need to do? Because if you are practicing anti-racism, you eventually know what to do. And then shift it to, what is prompting me to ask that question? Those are my advice for folks after the webinar. And if you need 3 white people to talk to, I think there's 3 of them on this webinar right now who'd love more anti-racist friends. So just putting us out there, I guess.
Yes. And thank you, Candace, for attributing that quote. Lama Rod Owens is the person who said, do your work so you don't become work for other people. Yeah, it's that is definitely amazing. I hope you had your pencils. I hope you had your recording, however, pen, whatever you did to record that. Remember, I said they were going to share some nuggets, some things that we can do, that you can do, that folks of color can ask of white folks if they're saying we're in this work, right? Not, I'm white, what can I do? That's not what they're asking. They're saying, I'm white, what can I do? What can I help? How can I become an ally? That's the one. That's the question that we're all collectively trying to answer. Here's what we know. We are done admiring the problem and we want to start leaping into action. Those action steps that Nikki and Katie and Carly shared with us today. We're going to leap into that. Okay. So we have a question already. We're gonna leap into Q&A. Pop your questions in the chat, and we will hopefully we'll try to highlight those questions and answer them for you. Bao, who is a part of the leadership residency, so glad that you're here, said, how would you address white folks coming from a perspective of wanting to be anti-racist, but get offended when you bring up their privilege? So there's this whole conversation about white privilege, right? And so just like I think Stephen said, Britt Hawthorne actually helped us see I have to look it up. There is a Latinx gentleman, professor, who does this work. And he says, if that's something that people balk at or push back at, white privilege, he offers the term and the definition, white immunity. White immunity, which says just what you think it says. If somebody's feathers are ruffled, okay, think of it this way. Because you identify as a white person, you have been immune to the oppression and the racism and the events and the things that happen to people of color simply because of their skin. So, Bao, great question. Sometimes for some folks, you do have to reconceptualize it. You do have to turn it. And then people are like, oh, yeah. Nope, you didn't earn it, but you've been immune to the consequences of racism. You've been immune. Okay. So that's something we also talk about a little bit. What else? Yes. Thank you. It's a thank you, Cass, I think. No, Dr. Nolan Cabrera is who I think coined that term, and there's the TED Talk over there in the chat. So check it out. It's an amazing TED Talk. I've watched it several times. It's awesome. What other questions do you have? Okay, here's another question from Candace for our panelists. What do you? Oh, I'm sorry, I answered that question. Anybody else want to answer that question? Sorry, y'all. Before we go on,
I think,
how would you all? Yes, from your perspective. Sorry.
just no. I think beautiful answer. Thank you for jumping in there, Jack. But I also think we also need to reframe the way that we're talking, bringing in other white folks. Like, there was a time in my life, and I still slip back into it occasionally, where I'm like telling other white people, like, you need to know this, you need to learn this, like, you need to recognize your privilege. That doesn't go over very well very often, especially when you're commanding other people do something that feels also really hard or maybe really scary. I think the recommendation that I have and that I give and that has worked for me with my family or with other people in my life is to welcome people into your journey. So instead of saying you have white privilege and you need to accept that, it's more like, hey, I just learned this thing about white privilege, and I'm recognizing this in myself. And let me, like, you're linking arms with people in the journey, telling them about what you're learning or exploring, or things that have impacted you, a quote, right, that really is sitting with you, a mistake that you made that you want to talk about, bringing people into your journey rather than requiring them to be on a journey of their own separate of you.
Thank you. Great advice.
If I can add a little note too, I think just coming from a perspective of an ally moving forward, it will be exhausting, and there will be different forms of resistance, whether it's I don't have privilege or I don't experience that way, or just an immediate response. And as a person who's practicing anti-racism, you can go like, oh, they don't get it, or oh, I'm frustrated, and you get stuck there. And one tactic I've tried to use is just opening to complete curiosity. I'm not going to teach you and I'm not going to guide you, but I'm just going to ask questions of why do you think that way? Or what about the word privilege specifically is causing you to feel that way? And just being curious and not carrying this level of needing to teach all the time. And then you can really start to hear the really deep roots of what that statement really means. It's a blanket statement, right? But then it comes from this really, really deep, sometimes really painful place. And if we're not curious, we can't get there. So instead of getting defensive and frustrated, I recommend curiosity.
Nice. Nice.
Often in order to get to that curiosity, you have to take responsibility for your own feelings around whiteness first. So if you haven't, then it's very easy to, I know for me, before I really took responsibility for that, I was constantly shaming other white people because it was a way of like, this is how I'm actually punishing myself about my own whiteness. And so being able to take that responsibility opened up that space for that.
Okay. There we go. Here's a question from Candace. What do you say to white people who say their other identities are primary so that they don't feel the need to explore their whiteness?
I can try to tackle that's Candace, thank you. I think wow. So I'll first start off, I identify as a queer woman, and just because of that does not mean that I automatically get a seat at the table of talking about race and racism because I've experienced some level of marginalization. Even though I know what that feels like and I know what that experience is like and I can empathize, that doesn't pass for the fact that I still live a very white experience. And so when I hear these things come up, I try really hard to find a way to like flip that to like, and could you imagine how that feels for a person of color in this experience in this kind of way? Like really drawing the lines of empathy, because sometimes we don't see them. And so saying like, wow, you've experienced that with this identity. Could you imagine what that feels like over here in this experience when it comes to race? And sometimes the light bulbs go off and sometimes you have to find a different way. But one way I've noticed to try to get people to a meeting spot is, if they don't want to talk about their whiteness, is just take those identities as a tool and say, you have hurt here, or you have this experience here, and it's similar over here on this side. So connecting the two. But that's a feat in itself, that whole question. So thank you for asking it.
Yeah. All right. We've got another question from Kyle. The United States is embarking on one of the most potentially disruptive and impactful presidential elections in our country's history. As an ally, what are your hopes and aspirations for showing up in this political debacle?
You go
Sorry,
ahead.
no, go ahead.
Well, I'll say something briefly and then Katie, take it away. But I think one thing, thinking about this one election, my challenge is, where are we showing up for other elections, and where are we looking down the ballot and things that are happening in our communities? There's real political strife happening in all of our communities, and much closer to home than one election, right? Just one person to vote for one election every 4 years. So my challenge to myself and to anybody else who's wondering about this is to do a little bit of work down the ballot, or to show up for more local elections, to get out there and do campaigning for the people who are change makers at a local level, and also can be like state representatives as well. And Katie, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Carly. So like this, what I'm about to say is inspired by having a white child who is assigned male at birth, and this thinking about, how there has been a huge amount of radicalization that has happened, especially among white youth who are assigned male at birth. And so when we look in that like 11 to 15 age range, and then beyond, there's this extreme radicalization that's happening because white, part of what I think it is, and part of my Shelley Takluck, if you have an opportunity to look up her work, she just had a new book come out called Being White Today, but part of it is spurred by this real sense of crisis with what's happening with young white boys who are very vulnerable to being recruited into white supremacy because of feelings of disconnection, shame, and a lack of seeing themselves in anti-racist movements. And so whose work is that to solve, like to heal? It's not people of the global majority. When we see young white boys participating in these school shootings, when we see these things, our response should be, what is going on? That there is such a lack of humanity that this is what our children are participating in. And so this election time is going to be a critical time for, and not just white youth, but also our family members, for people who are around us. We've seen the radicalization that's happened. And so we have to figure out, how do we take that responsibility of engaging in ways that are humanizing and also compassionately accountable, where we don't say, we're not just going to let you continue to participate in this, but also we're not going to allow you to become isolated, because in that isolation is where that radicalization happens. So that's what I hope, is that we can really think about, how do we engage this in a way that engage in this work in a way that where we take that responsibility for transforming white culture by bringing white people in and figuring out what is at the core of this.
Yeah. Oh, wow, y'all. I'm looking at the clock. I cannot believe our time is up. We've got some more good questions over there. The panelists have tried to drop answers to them, and our time is coming to an end. Before you go, I want to thank everybody so much for coming to this conversation, giving many, many, many thanks to our panelists and those who joined this conversation. Before you go, don't log off, not just yet. I'm going to drop some links for you, right? I'm going to drop, there are a lot of them, but we're going to drop them for you, all right? We're going to drop a link to Nikki's blog, Coming Out as a Co-Conspirator. She also, in addition to what you wrote down, I know you did, because I said grab your pens, grab your pencils, grab your electronic device. She gives some ideas about what to do. So I'm putting that in there. So we also have, if you want to say, hey, I want to add to this. I want to see what, what embracing, how I can partner with Embracing Equity. You can do that. Natani, thank you. She's dropping them for me. There's one to sign up if you want to connect with me. There's another one, right? If you want a free 30-minute one-on-one with me, if you have a burning question that we didn't answer that I may be able to help answer, get in there. I'll do that. I lead a year-long leadership residency. Join me in that. If you're in Minnesota and you want to reach out to Nikki, we're dropping that in. If you want to, do more steps to practice anti-racism, subscribe. We're going to drop a way to do that. And 3 more things, y'all. If you're a Montessorian and you're going to be at the AMI refresher course, we are going to have a session. You can meet us there live and in person in Dallas this coming weekend. So we're going to drop the link for you to register for our session if you want to do that. I'll be there with Rashi and Daisy. And then coming up next, y'all, we have 2 more webinars. This is the last one. I know you're like, oh my gosh, how many links are they going to drop? We want you to stay engaged in the conversation. Real talk, real action. Our goal is not only to talk about this. Remember, I said time for us to stop admiring and move to action. As we do these webinars, we're wanting to give you resources and things that you can do. Okay? So the next 2 webinar, the next one is on February 28th. Walk with us, transforming organizations from the inside out. We're going to talk about that year-long leadership residency that you just may want to join so that you can be about the work of transforming. Then the next one in March, y'all, you don't want to miss this one. Calls to action. Neutrality is not an option. It's kind of a part 2 of this conversation, right? I'm not going to be neutral here. Anti-racism requires action. So come and hear some samples and examples of actions that people took. sometimes at great risk to themselves professionally and personally, to do this work. So that, and stay tuned. If you showed up here in your white identity and said, I need to hear more, I jotted down those things. Coming up soon, and we'll get information to you later. We are going to have our cohorts. This cohort is specifically for white folks only. So I need you to stay tuned. There it is. We dropped in the cohort wait list for white folks specifically. How do I do this work? How do I link arms with other white folks? There's that. So I'm out of breath with all of that. But thank you for showing up. Thank you for participating in the chat, leaning into what some would consider is a courageous conversation about this work that we're doing. And stay engaged, y'all. We're here to support. We will see you all at the next one, 2 weeks, and then on the 6th in March. My strongest gratitude to this awesome, amazing panel. Thank you all so much for joining me and sharing your insights, the nuggets of information, and your challenges. So thank you. We love y'all. This is Love Day. Thank you for joining us. And we'll see you at the next webinar. Real talk, real action.
Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.